Arthur was once a ruthless tyrant who ruled the world with an iron fist. He clawed his way to the top by leaving mountains of corpses behind. He vaporized cities, crushed rebellions, and committed unspeakable atrocities, all for the sake of power. At life, warning him not to mess it up this time. The next thing he knew, Arthur opened his eyes to see two strangers smiling down at him. The man introduced himself as Reynold and the woman as Alice, his father and mother. Of course, they didn't expect a newborn to understand them, but they were overjoyed to have him. It took Arthur a minute to process it, but there was no denying the truth. He'd just been born, again. Despite being trapped in a baby's body with zero dignity, a bobblehead-sized skull, and no control over when he soils himself, Arthur grudgingly admitted that his new parents were exceptionally kind and attentive. Life wasn't so bad, aside from the diaper situations. But then something happened that completely shattered his understanding of the world. One day, Arthur watched as Reynold casually channeled raw energy into his fists and shattered a massive boulder like it was a breadstick. Arthur was stunned. In all these years of domination and conquest, he'd never seen power like that. Apparently, this kind of thing was normal around here, and Reynold was clearly pleased with his performance, so much so that he forgot to look up. A chunk of rock came tumbling down and bonked him right on the head. Alice had a bad feeling something like this would happen. So the moment Reynold got clocked by a falling rock, she rushed to his side and began healing the bump on his head with a soft glow of magic. But she warns him to be more careful next time he wants to show off. Sure, Reynold liked to flex a little, but when he got serious, those fists were no joke. On hunting trips, he could drop a wild boar with a single punch like it was nothing. And having him around makes things a lot easier for his party members. By the time he got home from one of these outings, drenched in boar blood and beaming with pride, he marched toward his family expecting a warm welcome, only to stop short when he remembered, yeah, maybe hugs can wait until after a bath. Arthur, meanwhile, had been observing all of this with great interest. And from watching Reynold punch wildlife into oblivion, he learned two important things. First, this world is clearly a dangerous place, dangerous enough that carrying weapons seems to be the norm. And second, if he ever wants to live freely again, he's going to need to learn how to fight. But that lesson would have to wait, because now that Reynold was home, Alice said it was nap time. And while Arthur usually hated being babied, this was the one part of infant life he actually enjoyed. In his old world, he could never rest easy. Assassins were always lurking, waiting for the moment his guard dropped. Sure, he could crush them all with ease, but living in constant paranoia wasn't exactly restful. Here, though, naps came with warm blankets, lullabies, and zero death threats. Months passed, and eventually Arthur's tiny baby limbs gained enough strength for him to move around on his own. The very first thing he did with his newfound mobility was crawl over to a mirror and stare into it. His parents thought it was adorable, just a baby mesmerized by his reflection. But he is just coming to terms with the fact that he really is a baby. No dream, no illusion, just shabby cheeks and a wide-eyed stare. And with mobility came freedom. Later that day, when Alice put him down for another nap, Arthur decided it was time to put his plan into action. The moment she left the room, he opened his eyes, tossed his blanket aside, and clambered over the edge of the crib like a tiny prison escapee. He then proceeds to crawl across the floor while Alice is busy doing the dishes, and she must be really focused on those dishes because Arthur makes it all the way to the other side of the room without her noticing. Arthur reached the library, pulled open the door, and dragged out a book. He needed information, anything to understand the rules of this new world. Flipping through its pages, he quickly got the lay of the land. The continent was called Dicathan, and it was split into 3 kingdoms. The Dark Kingdom, home to dwarves who lived in sprawling cities carved into the mountains and caves. The Eleanor Kingdom, a nation of elves nestled deep within ancient forests. And the Sappan Kingdom, a human realm ruled by a king, though unlike Arthur's former domain, no one here had ever nuked entire cities to seize power. Arthur's thirst for knowledge hadn't been quenched yet, so he grabbed another book, hoping for more answers. And this one didn't disappoint. It finally explained why the world around him seemed so underdeveloped. And the answer: magic. Turns out, this world didn't need high-tech gadgets or electricity when people could just bend the laws of nature to their will. Magic here came from manipulating mana, an energy found within the body, and while not everyone could use it, it played a huge role in everyday life. There were 2 main ways to use it: augmentation and conjuring. Augmentation was all about internal power. By circulating mana through the body, users could enhance their physical strength, speed, and durability to superhuman levels. Then there were the conjurers, who could project mana outward and manipulate the environment. Basically, if you could imagine it, a conjurer could probably make it happen. That about summed up the basics of the magic system in this world. But Arthur still had questions, mainly about the healing spell Alice used earlier. None of the books mentioned that type of magic, so he figured she must be a special case. From what he could gather, most people didn't awaken their mana until they hit puberty. Once awakened, their mana flowed through something called a mana core, which they then trained to harness and control their abilities. This part made perfect sense to Arthur. In his past life, his rise to power had been fueled by the use of ki, a power nearly identical to mana. So naturally, he decided to give it a try. He focused his energy, calming his mind, and sure enough, he felt a spark. Deep within him, his mana core began to take form. It was a huge step forward, or at least it would have been, if he hadn't been caught moments later. Alice, who had been searching frantically ever since discovering the empty crib, finally found him. She was immensely relieved he wasn't injured, scooping him up in a tight hug. But just as Arthur started to panic, thinking she might have sensed his newly formed mana core, she wrinkled her nose. Nope, she just noticed he pooped himself. Again. 2 years flew by. One day, Alice sat by the window, writing in her journal. She was incredibly thankful that Arthur was growing up healthy and strong, but something still weighed on her heart. He hadn't smiled. Not once, since the day he was born. She tried not to worry too much, but it lingered in the back of her mind. Just then, she notices Reynold and Arthur outside, and it looks like Reynold is giving Arthur some sword lessons. Arthur was surprisingly focused for a toddler, clearly intrigued by the blade in his hands. But Alice was not amused. She was furious. Arthur had already learned an important rule in this household. Alice is not someone you want to see angry. If he was going to keep training, he'd have to be a little more subtle about it, and maybe stick to less stabby weapons for now. To steer Arthur away from any more accidental sword training, Alice decides to take him out for a relaxing day around town. And Arthur is particularly excited about this because it will give him a chance to gather valuable first-hand information about this world. As they explore the town, Arthur observes everything with sharp, calculating eyes as much as a 2-year-old can. He notes the level of the nation's technology by examining the weapons sold in the markets, studies unfamiliar materials, and even gets to witness a mage casting fire magic up close, an experience that leaves him both fascinated and eager to learn more. By the end of the day, though, Arthur's tiny body is running on fumes. He can barely keep his eyes open as Alice carries him home, eager to get him into his crib for a much-needed nap. Despite all the limitations that come with being stuck in a baby's body, Arthur has grown to enjoy this new life. After all, in his past life, he was tossed into the world without a shred of support, no family, no guidance, just an orphanage and a cold bed. But now, he had parents who genuinely loved him. It was nice. As Arthur finally drifts off to sleep on Alice's shoulder, she gently carries him toward his crib. Along the way, she whispers how proud she is of him. She's noticed his curiosity, how he sneaks out of bed to read books, how his eyes light up when he's out exploring. She's convinced he has an adventurous heart probably inherited from Reynold. Deep down, she knows the day will come when Arthur sets off on his own to see the world. And even though she'd prefer he live a peaceful life close to home, she promises to support him no matter what, as long as he's happy. The next morning, Arthur stands by the window and watches as Reynold begins his daily training routine in the yard. Eager to see magic in action again, Arthur's eyes widen as Reynold starts circulating mana through his body. A moment later, a few rocks rise shakily from the ground. Reynold acts like it's the coolest thing ever, but Arthur is quietly unimpressed. This is clearly the extent of Reynold's skill in conjuring. Of course, Arthur knows that conjuring isn't his father's forte. Reynold specializes in augmentation, and his strength shines brightest when the mana stays inside his body. Still, the display is enough to reignite Arthur's motivation. He's about to hop down from the table to go train when Alice calls out, "Nap time." Arthur still can't speak yet, so he starts whining as they pass the bookshelf, but Alice tells him he needs to take a nap, so there's no time for books right now. Normally, that would be game over. But not today. Arthur recently unlocked a powerful new technique, pouting. He's mastered the fine art of baby-level emotional manipulation, turning his oversized eyes and tiny frown into a weapon of mass persuasion. So even though Alice still wants to put him down for a nap, she eventually relents and just lets him read his book. Once alone, Arthur cracks it open and gets to work. Over the last 2 years, he's made serious progress with his mana core. And now, with each passing day, he's getting better and better. By carefully gathering fragments of mana within his body over time, Arthur managed to forge a mana core of his own. The process had been grueling, pushing his tiny body to its limits, but the payoff was undeniable. Now, with just a bit more effort, he felt ready to attempt something truly monumental, his first spell. Unfortunately, Arthur seriously underestimated just how much power he was packing. The moment he channeled his mana outward, there was a deafening boom and the entire house exploded. Alice and Reynolds had been outside at the time, and the blast was so massive that it singed the skin right off Reynolds' back. Both of them were otherwise okay, shaken, but still standing. But that relief quickly gave way to horror when they realized one critical thing. Arthur was still inside. Panic surged as they rushed back into the wreckage, terrified at what they might find. There was no way a toddler could have survived an explosion of that size. Or so they thought. When Reynolds reached the remains of the library, what he found left him completely stunned. Arthur, completely unharmed, was standing in the middle of the rubble. Not only was he alive, but it quickly became clear that he had been the one who caused the explosion in the first place. He is barely 3 years old, so it shouldn't have been possible for him to use magic until he was at least 12, yet Arthur is already practically a master of mana. Arthur stood there, chest puffed out, proud of what he'd accomplished, until the ceiling reminded him that it still existed. 2 massive roof beams came crashing down right above him, and Arthur quickly realized his baby legs weren't fast enough to get him out of the way. Just when it looked like he was done for, both Alice and Reynolds burst in to save him. Together, they kept him safe. Arthur lay there in silence, stunned not by the explosion but by what had just happened. This was the first time in his entire life across both lifetimes that someone had risked their life to protect him. And the moment he saw Alice start to cry from relief, something inside him cracked. The emotions hit him like a tidal wave, and before he knew it, he was crying too. In his past life, Arthur could never have done something like this. Back then, he was expected to rule with an iron fist and zero mercy. Case in point, once a man attempted to assassinate him. After the killer was caught, the royal council quickly convened to deliver justice. And on top of that, they plan to ship the man's wife and son off to a camp that has never heard of the Geneva Convention, so they are doomed to be tortured and experimented on. Because, well, why not? The man begged Arthur to spare his family, insisting they had nothing to do with his actions. So in what passed for mercy at the time, Arthur personally executed them on the spot. That was basically his version of a Monday. Fast forward to the present, his Mondays now involve training sessions with his dad, Reynolds. Today, Reynolds wants Arthur to try fighting with gauntlets for a change. After all, the kid already has enough sword skills to last 2 lifetimes. But Arthur refuses to switch. He's sticking with the sword. So Reynolds humors him and picks up a blade too. Just to spice things up, he reinforces his sword with mana. What he didn't expect was for Arthur to do the exact same thing, and then effortlessly slice through Reynolds' blade like it was made of paper. That's when Reynolds realizes the truth. Arthur's too talented for him to handle. The kid needs a proper teacher, so he heads inside to talk it over with Alice. Alice, however, immediately shuts the idea down. She hates the thought of sending Arthur off to some faraway town just to learn. They'd already agreed. Reynolds would handle the combat training and she'd teach him magic. Simple plan. But Reynolds points out that Arthur just obliterated a mana-infused sword, and he's still in toddler mode. If he's pulling this off now, who knows what he'll be capable of in a few years? Clearly, he needs formal training. Alice can't deny that Arthur's something special, but she still can't stomach the idea of leaving him at some boarding school in the city. The debate gets heated. Voices rise. Neither of them is budging. Arthur, finally fed up, interrupts their bickering with a simple solution. "Why don't you just come with me?" Cue silence. Neither parent had considered that, but it makes perfect sense. Arthur gets a real teacher, and they don't have to leave him behind. Problem solved. They're all in. The very next day, a carriage pulls up to take them to the city. They'll be traveling with some old friends, people Arthur actually recognizes. They're the same ones who helped rebuild the house after he accidentally blew it up. The group Arthur's traveling with is part of an adventuring party called the Twin Horns. Their leader, a confident and friendly guy named Adam, introduces himself first. Then comes Angela, who makes her introduction, a little more physical. Meanwhile, Alice just watches the whole thing with a big smile like this is all perfectly normal. Thankfully, before Arthur loses consciousness, a much gentler member of the team, Durden, swoops in and pulls him free. He gives Arthur a simple high five, which Arthur appreciates a lot more than Angela's full-body tackle. Then Arthur notices someone standing on top of the carriage, striking a dramatic pose for no apparent reason. It's a girl clearly trying to farm aura points or look mysterious. Maybe both. She doesn't speak, but the others introduce her as Jasmine. The final member is Helen, the party's sharp-eyed archer. With introductions out of the way, everyone climbs aboard the carts, and the journey begins. Along the way, Alice asks Arthur if he's excited about his first big trip. He says yes, but mentally he's marveling at how primitive everything is. After traveling for most of the day, the group decides to take a break for lunch, so they set up camp, but as soon as they stop, they are attacked by wolves. Unfortunately for the wolves, their strategy is non-existent. They charge straight in like they've never heard of tactics, and they get obliterated by the Twin Horns almost immediately. Arthur finds the battle fascinating. It's the first real combat he's witnessed in this world, and it only fuels his desire to get strong enough to fight off threats like that by himself. With a pile of wolf meat now available, the group decides to cook dinner. But since they're traveling light, it's going to be plain grilled meat, no spices, no frills. While prepping, Alice notices a small injury on Reynolds' arm and offers to heal it. But just as she starts, Jasmine quickly steps in and tells her to wait. Everyone else gathers around to keep watch. Healers like Alice are incredibly rare here, and showing off healing magic is basically putting a target on her back. Once Alice is done healing Reynolds, everyone goes back to what they were doing before, but Adam decides he wants to get a little exercise before he goes to bed. Naturally, his idea of a workout is sparring with a 4-year-old. Sounds bad, but in his defense, he's heard rumors about Arthur's strength and wants to see for himself. This is just a friendly match, in theory. Adam charges up his spear with mana. Arthur, unfazed, does the same with his sword. As the match begins, Arthur uses wind magic to enhance his speed and disappears, only to reappear behind Adam in a flash. It would have been the perfect counterattack if his tiny toddler feet hadn't betrayed him. He slips, giving Adam just enough time to recover. What follows is a clumsy but intense exchange of blows. Arthur eventually gets knocked into the air. He's still a child after all. But before he can hit the ground, the others rush in to catch him. They all start scolding Adam for nearly flattening a kid, but he insists he wasn't holding back because Arthur was too strong for that. No way a toddler should be capable of what Arthur just pulled off. He's convinced Reynolds been secretly giving him super soldier training. Reynolds, however, swears that Arthur learned everything on his own, and that's the truth. Then, out of nowhere, Jasmine walks up and startles Arthur. She was watching the fight and was clearly impressed. She asks him to teach her how he used magic to boost his speed. Arthur had planned to keep that technique a secret, something he mastered in his previous life. But judging by the determined look in her eyes, she's not going to drop it anytime soon. The next morning, the journey continues with a few breaks along the way. During one of those breaks, Adam gives Arthur a crash course in spearmanship, and a few minutes later, Helen gives him some quick archery tips. Arthur picks things up almost instantly. His only weapon experience was with swords in his past life, so he's glad to be expanding his arsenal now. Inspired by how much he's learning, Arthur decides to share his secret technique with Jasmine after all. By combining wind magic with mana in the feet, one can drastically increase speed. He demonstrates once, and Jasmine, ever the prodigy herself, pulls it off flawlessly. Later, while riding in the carriage, Arthur is quietly reading a magic book, but Jasmine is sitting nearby doing absolutely nothing, except staring at him. And it's no coincidence. She keeps finding excuses to be near him. The next morning, she even gives Arthur a knife as a thank you gift for teaching her. It's a rare gesture from her. She doesn't usually make an effort to connect with people. Clearly, Arthur's made an impression. A few minutes later, everyone piles back into the carriages and the journey resumes. Arthur is quietly reading a book when, out of nowhere, chaos erupts. The caravan is ambushed by bandits. They're completely surrounded, leaving no room to escape. The bandit leader barks out a cruel order: capture the women and children to be sold as slaves. With that, his men charge in. The twin horns and Reynolds leap into action, holding their ground with skill and strength. Individually, the bandits don't stand a chance, but they have numbers on their side, and it's only a matter of time before they overwhelm the defenders. In the thick of the battle, Reynolds is launched into one of the carriages by the bandit leader and crashes hard. He's badly injured. Alice immediately tries to rush to his side, but Reynolds stops her. If the bandits discover her healing magic, she'll become their #1 target. Instead, he looks to Arthur. With grim urgency, Reynolds tells Arthur to take Alice and run. Arthur resists. He doesn't want to leave him behind. But Reynolds reveals that Alice is pregnant. Protecting her now isn't just important, it's essential. Arthur's face hardens with understanding. When Reynolds gives the signal, Arthur readies his magic, preparing to escape with Alice. Meanwhile, Reynolds stays behind to buy them time. The bandit leader orders his men to chase after Arthur and Alice, but Reynolds isn't letting anyone past him. This time, he's not just fighting, he's defending his entire world. Elsewhere, a few lesser bandits try to break away and pursue Arthur and Alice, but Adam and Jasmine throw some daggers at them and take them out to clear a path for Arthur to escape with Alice. Everyone's doing their part to protect Arthur and Alice. Arthur, in turn, is running, not for his own sake, but to keep someone dear to him safe. It's almost poetic, considering how he spent his past life taking things without a second thought. Now he's running to avoid losing someone irreplaceable. After several minutes of sprinting, Arthur figures they've put enough distance between themselves and the bandits to be in the clear, but he's wrong. From a cliff above, a lone bandit watches them. Unlike the others, this one can use magic. Without warning, he launches a wind spell straight at Arthur and Alice. Arthur doesn't notice the bandit at first, and by the time he does, it's too late. The spell is already in motion, so the only thing Arthur can do is push Alice out of the way and take the hit alone. The hit sends his small body flying backward, right off the edge of the cliff. And given his toddler frame, a fall from that height means one thing: certain death. But if he's going down, he's not going alone. Arthur pulls out the knife Jasmine gave him. With one last burst of strength, he hurls it at the magic-wielding bandit. The blade lands true, sinking in and wrapping its cord around the bandit's ankle. With a brutal yank, Arthur drags the man over the edge with him. From above, the adventurers scramble to save him, flinging spells and desperate shouts into the wind. But Arthur's already fallen too far. He's out of reach, out of time. And yet, as the world blurs past him and death draws near, Arthur isn't afraid. In these final moments, his thoughts aren't of fear or regret, but clarity. He remembers the man from his past life who fought to protect his family, and suddenly, he understands. Without hesitation, Arthur sacrificed himself to save someone he loved. Not out of duty, not out of pride, just love. He doesn't regret it, not for a second. Still, as the wind rushes past and the end approaches, a single bittersweet thought echoes in his mind. I just wish I had a little more time to live with them, to be part of that family. After surviving that brutal fall, Arthur somehow manages to drag himself out of the river and into the safety of a nearby cave. But just as he's catching his breath, he finds himself face to face with a terrifying creature. He tries to sneak attack the monster to increase his chances of survival, but the monster simply smacks him out of the air and tells him to calm down. Turns out it's not hostile at all. In fact, it just wants to be friends. Still, Arthur's not buying it. But right now he's badly injured and in no shape to fight or flee. The monster, noticing his condition, plucks some berries off the cave wall and offers them to Arthur. He's skeptical. Random cave berries don't exactly scream safe to eat. But as he moves, he hears a sickening snap and crumples to the ground, tears welling up in his eyes from the pain. The creature, unfazed, tells Arthur to stop crying. He's lucky to even be alive after that fall. It says it'll answer his questions, but only if he eats the berries first. Hesitant but desperate, Arthur finally takes a bite, and to his surprise, they're actually pretty tasty. Before long, he's devoured them all. Feeling a bit better, Arthur finally asks the question that's been haunting him. Does the creature know anything about his parents? The monster explains that it's stuck in the cave and can't go check on them, but it does have the ability to see great distances. It conjures a screen from thin air and shows Arthur a vision of his parents defeating the rest of the bandits. They're alive and safe. Relieved beyond words, Arthur thanks the creature for showing him. Since he'll be here a while, he decides to be friendly. The creature introduces herself as Sylvia, and it turns out she's not just kind, she's a great caretaker. Over the next few days, Arthur eats, rests, and recovers under Sylvia's watchful eye. Eventually, Arthur's strong enough to consider heading home. But Sylvia warns him the journey is too dangerous. The cave lies on the edge of the elven forest, a place teeming with magical beasts and ruthless bandits. Alone, Arthur wouldn't make it. However, Sylvia has another option. She could open a dimensional rift and send him somewhere safer. The catch? It takes time, so Arthur has to wait. With nothing else to do, Arthur grabs his stick and begins practicing his swordsmanship. Days pass. He grows fond of Sylvia, but he still doesn't know much about her, only that she looks terrifying and is hiding from something and has a surprisingly gentle heart. One day after his training, Arthur sits down to meditate and work on his mana. Sylvia notices and is impressed. He already has a mana core, rare for someone his age. Then, to Arthur's amazement, she demonstrates a technique, gathering mana while casting a spell. It's something he's never seen before, and something that could make him incredibly powerful. Before offering to teach it, Sylvia asks what he intends to do with that power. Arthur, remembering how close he came to losing his family, replies without thinking. He wants to destroy anyone who threatens them. Sylvia doesn't approve. She flicks him hard on the forehead, knocking him back. She tells him she would never teach that kind of power to someone driven by hate. Arthur, confused, argues that it's only natural to want revenge. But Sylvia raises a single finger to his head and says she could easily split his skull open or simply offer a gentle touch. She asks which he would prefer. Arthur clearly chooses the gentle one. She explains that letting hatred guide your actions leads to nothing but an empty, endless cycle of violence. She doesn't want Arthur to waste his life that way. Then she asks again, what will he do with the power? This time, Arthur thinks of the smiling faces of his loved ones. And with a clearer heart, he answers, he wants to protect the people he cares about. Sylvia approves of Arthur's new answer with a soft smile. It's exactly what she wanted to hear. But beyond the quiet safety of the cave, trouble brews. A creature eerily similar in appearance to Sylvia is closing in fast. It's clear that someone, or something, is tracking her, and it's nearly at her doorstep. Back in Arthur's former life, he wasn't just any ordinary boy. He was a king. But the title meant little. The true power rested in the hands of the senators, and Arthur was nothing more than a tool for their dirty work. Whenever they needed a war waged or a rebellion crushed, they summoned him like a weapon, cold, sharp, and efficient. But Arthur never wanted that life. He never wanted to be their puppet. Now in the present, things are different. Under Sylvia's guidance, Arthur begins learning her mana technique. She patiently walks him through it, showing how to draw in mana from the air and shape it with intent. When it's his turn, Arthur focuses, condensing the surrounding mana, and before long, he channels it into his body. The surge of power is immediate. He feels stronger, faster, more alive. Excited, he runs to thank Sylvia for teaching him. But before he can say a word, Sylvia goes still. Her expression sharpens. She senses something. Without hesitation, she shoves Arthur into a nearby pile of rocks and urgently whispers for him to stay hidden. Confused, Arthur peeks out, and that's when he sees it. Another monster, almost identical to Sylvia, has entered the cave. Sylvia clearly recognizes him, and her voice is tinged with shock. "I can't believe you found me," she mutters. The stranger isn't here for a chat. He demands that Sylvia come with him, no questions asked. But Sylvia refuses, flatly. "No," she says. That's all it takes. He fires off a blast of energy without warning. Arthur tenses up, ready to jump in, but then he hears Sylvia's voice echo in his mind, calm but firm. "Don't interfere." The intruder tries once more to reason with her. "If you don't come willingly," he warns, "I'll have no choice but to kill you." But Sylvia stands her ground. She'd rather die than obey him. Her aura begins to swell, the cave trembling from the raw energy she's gathering. Her eyes flash, and for the first time, Arthur sees it, Sylvia's true form. As it turns out, Sylvia is no ordinary monster. She's a dragon. In her true form, her power surges far beyond what Arthur had ever imagined. Without hesitation, she unleashes a massive blast of energy at the intruder. He barely manages to block it, shouting at her mid-fight, warning that in her current weakened condition, using that much power is suicidal. But Sylvia already knows that. She's fully aware that pushing herself this far could cost her life, but she's at peace with it. She's lived long and she's lived well. With a fierce roar, she slams the other creature into the wall, forcing him back. But he isn't finished. He gets back up, eyes burning with rage, and begins firing a relentless storm of blasts at her. Sylvia takes the full brunt of the attack, her body battered and bruised, but her focus isn't on herself. Her eyes dart toward the pile of rocks where Arthur is hiding. The battle is getting too close. Then the other dragon fires one last powerful blast straight toward her, and she can't afford to dodge. If she moves, it'll hit Arthur. So she makes a choice. Summoning every last ounce of strength, Sylvia intercepts the attack and activates one final spell. Time itself grinds to a halt. Within the frozen world, she turns to the rocks and softly calls out, "Arthur, come out." Arthur cautiously steps out, wide-eyed and confused. He wants to ask 1,000 questions. Why she never told him she was a dragon? What's going on? But there's no time. Sylvia's voice is strained. "This spell won't last long," she says, opening the dimensional rift she had been preparing for days. But the spell is incomplete. Her injuries, the rushed casting, it's all too much. Instead of a direct path home, the portal opens to a remote, unfamiliar place. She winces, frustrated that she couldn't send him somewhere safer. Her goal had been to avoid the wild, dangerous forest. But right now, she has no choice. Still, she looks at Arthur with confidence. He's not the same boy he was when he first stumbled into her cave. With the technique she taught him, she believes he'll be able to survive and find his way back home. "I know he'll make it," she says softly, and with a final push, she sends Arthur through the rift. Before Arthur steps through the portal, Sylvia gently asks him one last time, what does he intend to do with the power she's given him? Without a second thought, Arthur replies, he'll use it to protect his family and nothing more. That answer puts Sylvia at ease. She smiles, satisfied that Arthur's heart is in the right place, that he won't use his strength for selfish purposes. But before he goes, there are a few things she wants to give him. With a soft glow, she conjures an egg and a radiant feather before him. "Wrap the egg in the feather," she says. "Keep it safe. Cherish it." Then, as her final parting gift, she reaches out and imprints her will onto Arthur's body, forming glowing marks along his arms. Suddenly, intricate tattoos stretch from his shoulders to his wrists. Arthur stares in shock. He wasn't expecting to get full-sleeve tattoos today. Sylvia lets out a faint laugh, but doesn't have the strength left to explain. She tells him he will figure out how to use it one day, but sadly, she won't be there to teach him anymore. Her tone softens, filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Arthur. The truth is, I could have sent you home the moment you arrived. But I didn't. I was just happy. Having you here, laughing, training, it made me feel alive again. I didn't want it to end. Her eyes glisten as she continues, and now, because of my selfishness, I put you in danger. Arthur's heart sinks. He wishes he could do something, anything, to stop what's happening, to save her. But deep down, he knows he doesn't have the strength to change the outcome. Still, none of it matters to him. Dragon or not, monster or not, Sylvia is precious to him. She's family, and losing her hurts more than anything. Arthur looks at Sylvia and tells her something from the heart, that he thinks of her as a mother. Sylvia smiles softly but reminds him you already have a mom. Arthur pauses, then grins. Then you can be my grandma instead. Sylvia blinks, surprised, but then she laughs. With a gentle push, she urges Arthur toward the portal. He understands. Holding the egg and feather close, he steps toward it. But at the very last moment, panic overtakes him. He turns back and pleads with Sylvia to come too. He begs her not to stay behind. But Sylvia simply smiles and shakes her head. She can't leave. Not now. Before Arthur can argue further, the portal closes and he vanishes. Time resumes. The enemy's final blast crashes into Sylvia and the impact sends her crumpling to the ground. Smoke and rubble swirl around her still form. The other monster approaches, cautious. Sylvia was always too powerful to fall so easily, and he suspects as much. But his caution comes too late. As he steps within range, Sylvia draws on the last of her strength, every last shred of her mana, and unleashes a final devastating blast. It engulfs him completely, wiping him out along with everything in a 1-mile radius. As Arthur is pulled through space, he hears Sylvia's voice one last time, a message meant just for him. She asks him if he remembers what she said earlier about the right way to use your power, and Arthur remembers, but he is still really sad about what happened. Sylvia tells him that the world is a sad place, so things like this will happen from time to time, but that's exactly why you need to change it, make it better. Arthur protests. How could he possibly do something so big? But Sylvia isn't asking for the impossible. You don't need to change everything overnight. Just take it one step at a time, she says. This isn't your first time holding power. I know who you were. She knows about his past life, about the king he once was. She doesn't agree with how he ruled back then, but she believes in him now. As long as you don't let hatred rule you. I know you'll become a great king, the kind this world truly needs. Then her voice fades completely. Sometime later, Arthur wakes up on the forest floor. He takes a shaky breath, clutching the gifts she left behind. He makes a silent vow to fulfill her wish, but first, he has to find his way out of this forest. After being teleported into the elven forest, Arthur begins his journey to return home. As he walks, he suddenly hears a blood-curdling scream echoing through the woods. It sounds like it's coming from a little girl, so he immediately gathers mana in his feet and races toward the sound to investigate. He leaps into a tall tree for a better vantage point, and once he's up there, he clearly sees a group of bandits kidnapping a young elf girl. She tries to escape, but the bandits have already grabbed her and are covering her mouth to keep her from screaming further. Since the girl is an elf, they plan to sell her as a slave on the black market for a huge profit once they leave the forest. They tie her up and toss her into the back of their carriage. As Arthur watches the scene unfold, he has flashbacks of when he and his own family were attacked by bandits. He remembers hearing them talk about keeping him and the women alive to be sold into slavery later, and the memory fills him with rage. His first instinct is to slaughter all the bandits for committing such a heinous crime, but he remembers what Sylvia told him about controlling his anger. He takes a moment to calm himself and think. He realizes that attacking now would put the girl's life at risk, so he decides to wait for the right moment to strike. The bandits get into their carriage and begin riding out of the forest, with Arthur trailing them closely from the shadows. By nightfall, the bandits are forced to stop and set up camp, unable to travel in the dark. Arthur debates whether to keep following them until they reach a human town or to strike now. But then he overhears them joking about how his favorite piano key is A minor, and decides he can't risk leaving the girl with them any longer. Still, he needs to wait for it to get darker before making his move. Arthur sits down and begins meditating, preparing himself for the murder charges he's about to rack up. Once it's sufficiently dark, he opens his eyes and begins planning the attack. He notices the bandits have a group of horned wolves on leashes, strange since wild beasts like that should be so obedient. A closer look reveals they're wearing magical collars that force them to comply, and Arthur sees an opportunity. He throws a few rocks at the wolves to rile them up. Their howling draws the attention of the bandits, and the leader orders one of his men to shut those damn wolves up. The bandit stomps over and kicks one of the wolves in the neck to silence it. The moment he's distracted, Arthur makes his move. He summons a mana blade and jumps down behind the man, slashing him to death in seconds. Arthur grabs the dead man's weapon. When another bandit comes to investigate, Arthur leaps on his back and slits his throat. That's 2 down, but Arthur's body is already growing tired. He needs to end this quickly. Just then, a third bandit approaches to see what's going on. Arthur tries to kill him instantly but misses the vital organs. The man screams, alerting the rest of the camp. The bandit leader realizes Arthur is a mage and knows this won't be an easy fight. Still, he doesn't want to kill Arthur either. A young mage would fetch an even higher price on the black market than the elf girl. The leader channels mana into his arms and swings at Arthur. Arthur dodges and tries to counter with a kick, but the leader evades it. Arthur throws his knife to catch him off guard, but the bandit catches it and turns it against him. Arthur is knocked to the ground and the leader lifts him up by the ankles, mocking him, saying that kids can't compete with adult strength. Arthur knows he's right, at least in terms of raw power. But Arthur has something else: magic. He casts a fireball directly at the bandit's knee. While the man screams in pain, Arthur lunges forward and stabs him in the head with a knife. Only the wounded bandit from earlier remains. Arthur quickly finishes him off, then hurries to check on the girl in the carriage. The girl, Tessia, had been blindfolded the entire time and was completely unaware of what had happened. Arthur gently assured her that he had dealt with all the bandits and that she was safe now. As he helped her out of the carriage, he told her she could return home. However, Tessia noticed the blood on Arthur's hand and immediately grew concerned for him. Arthur realized that the sight of blood could be disturbing for a child, and it probably wasn't wise to let her see the bodies lying around. He asked her to wait nearby for a moment and then went to cover the bandits' corpses with a tarp. Curious, Tessia asked what happened to her kidnappers. Not wanting to tell her the truth about killing them, Arthur vaguely replied that they'd been in an accident and wouldn't be bothering her again. Satisfied with the answer, she didn't ask anything further. Arthur retrieved her belongings from the carriage and was about to say goodbye when Tessia grabbed his arm, pleading with him not to leave her alone. She feared being attacked by tree ghosts or something worse if left by herself. Though she knew the directions to her village, she had no idea how far it was or how long it would take to get there. Arthur wasn't thrilled about taking a detour, but he knew Tessia wouldn't survive the journey alone. In the end, he agreed to escort her home. Before they left, Arthur noticed the wolves the bandits had captured and briefly considered using them for transportation, but he had no idea how to control them. He decided to leave them, but Tessia insisted they at least remove the magic collars so the wolves could return to the forest. Arthur warned that the wolves might turn aggressive once the collars were off, but Tessia believed they wouldn't hurt her since she hadn't harmed them. As a resident of the forest, she felt it was her duty to look after the creatures that lived there. She removed the collars, and just as she hoped, the wolves calmly walked back into the woods. The next morning, Arthur and Tessia set off toward the elf village. After some time, they took a break to eat. Arthur cooked a simple stew made from dried meat and salt. Nothing fancy, but it would give them the energy they needed. Tessia wasn't impressed with the smell, but she reluctantly ate it. During their meal, she asked Arthur why he had come to Elshire Forest, since humans rarely ventured there, especially alone and as young as him. Arthur explained that he had gotten separated from his family and ended up there by chance. Curious, he asked Tessia what life was like in the kingdom of Eleanor. She spoke fondly of it, saying she loved living there. Though her parents were often busy, she spent most of her time with her servant and grandfather. Their journey continued, but since Tessia didn't know the exact distance to her village, there was no telling how long it would take. To make things worse, the wolves she had freed earlier were now trailing them, much to Arthur's annoyance. He was starting to regret not dealing with them when he had the chance. That night, Arthur decided to stay outside the tent and keep watch, just in case the wolves tried to attack while they slept. But before long, Tessia peeked out and asked him to come inside. Arthur insisted he wasn't tired and would stand guard, but Tessia was clearly too frightened to sleep alone. She begged him to stay with her, and eventually, Arthur agreed. He settled inside the tent, planning to keep watch from there for her peace of mind. Though she tried to act brave, Tessia made it clear that she wanted Arthur to stay by her side. Before falling asleep, she asked about the human kingdom and whether it was true that all humans were perverts who married multiple wives. Taken aback, Arthur asked where she had heard that, and she said her grandfather told her. Arthur admitted that people like that did exist, especially in families like the Greyrets, but assured her that most humans were modest. Tessia believed him, turned over, and soon drifted off to sleep. The wolves never attacked, so by morning, Arthur and Tessia got up and continued their journey. Over the past few days, Tessia had started to warm up to Arthur, and now that she wasn't constantly haunted by thoughts of the slave traders, she seemed a lot happier. That said, she was still pretty hopeless when it came to survival skills. She couldn't even cross a creek without help. Naturally, Arthur had to carry her across. Suddenly, Arthur was struck by a strange, throbbing pain in his chest. He had no idea what was causing it. Worried, Tessia ran off to search for medicinal herbs that might help, but Arthur suspected this wasn't some ordinary illness. As he leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath, the same wolf from before appeared. Panic rose in his chest. He was in no shape to fight and decided to attack. Just then, Tessie returned with the herbs, and Arthur quickly warned her to stay back in case the wolf became aggressive. But to their surprise, the wolf simply dropped a dead pig in front of Arthur and calmly walked away. Arthur was left confused by the gesture, but Tessia assumed the wolf was trying to thank him for helping earlier. That night, they made camp and enjoyed roasted meat by the fire. It tasted far better than the bland stew they'd been living off, and Tessia was thrilled. While searching for herbs earlier, she'd also come across some mushrooms and offered a few to Arthur. Unfortunately, he probably shouldn't have eaten them. He ended up with a nasty case of diarrhea. Once he was done dealing with that, Arthur was exhausted and on the verge of passing out. But Tessia, full of energy, kept chatting away. She told him how her grandfather used to read her storybooks about the human and dwarven kingdoms and how she had always wanted to visit those places. But because elves didn't trust the other races, she'd never been allowed to. Mid-story, Tessia noticed Arthur hadn't been listening. Still, she could tell he was just tired, so she gently draped a blanket over him and wished him good night. The next morning, they continued on their journey, but the pain in Arthur's chest had only gotten worse. Tessia apologized for not being able to help, but Arthur told her not to worry about it. Trying to lighten the mood, Tessia asked if it was alright to call him Artie, since she considered him a friend now. After all, they had spent so much time together and grown close. Arthur said he didn't mind and didn't react much, which caught Tessia off guard. Jokingly, he swore to cherish every moment that the great Lady Tessia considered him a friend. She didn't take it well and told him to stop acting like a child. Arthur just laughed. It was funny, considering she had begged him to stay by her side because she was scared. Tessia insisted that was completely different. Still, Arthur couldn't help but reflect. Tessia was the first real friend he had ever made. Even back in his old world, people had always been afraid of him. He never truly had someone he could call a friend until now. Just then, Tessia spotted something familiar in the distance and called Arthur over. He followed, half expecting her to show him some oddly shaped stick, but instead he found himself standing in front of a massive tree with a glowing portal at its center. Tessia turned to him and smiled, telling him this was the entrance to the elf village. Then, extending her hand, she said, "Come with me." This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.